Internets, welcome to another episode of Step Off Radio. Today we have a special guest join us on the show. She is an organizer here in San Diego from the Palestinian Youth Movement. We have Subrein. Thank you so much for joining us, Subrein.
Thanks for having me here today.
Always a pleasure. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with the work that you do, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And what is your role in the PYM San Diego chapter?
Yeah, so I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement. I'm an organizer, and I specifically do social media and like other media related things here in San Diego. So I grew up here also. I went to college here, I went to school here. And honestly, I joined PYM because I needed a space to do like Palestinian activism work. And like growing up and when I went to college, we had like SJP, but then coming out of college, there was kind of like nothing until I found PYM. So PYM really was like that space for me to be able to do something that wasn't necessarily like college like centered. So PYM really gave me that space. Also to be able to like do something in the Palestine related field, that was something that I also do in my own work field. So whether that was like social media and like digital work. So yeah, that was really.
Oh, thank you. So I wanted to ask, for fighting against apartheid in Palestine, is this a cause that's been close to your heart from a very young age? Is this something that you got more involved in as an adult? What was your entryway into like this advocacy?
Yeah, so both my parents are Palestinian. Both my parents grew up in refugee camps back home. So whenever I would go back home, I would visit my family in refugee camps. And I think just like seeing a lot of like the differences like growing up here in the States and then versus going back to visit them in the camps, it was like very weird to me as a child, and I kind of didn't really understand much of it because it was kind of like normalized, like okay, we're just going back home to visit the family. But it wasn't until I got older and I started learning more about like Palestine and like going to more of like the protests when I was younger, I was like, oh, okay, this is not normal. This is not what like back home is supposed to look like. And so then I got more introduced to like activism and more about like the struggle of Palestine and the over-militarization that we have like back home in the camps in the West Bank area. And I think like the constant back and forth going from Palestine to the States really like made me feel, upset about what was happening, but it also kind of lit a fire in me that was like, okay, like this is not right, and I need to be part of the solution. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that experience like going to visit family in Palestine? Was it very sobering leaving the States and you essentially enter into a completely different world?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I grew up going back and forth since I was a kid, it was very normalized to me. Again, my whole family lives back in Palestine, and everyone that I know really just like they all live in the camps. I didn't think it was not normal until I got older and started learning more about Palestine. But once I got older and I started seeing a lot more of like the injustices that were happening, whether that was like IFO soldiers coming into the camps, tear gassing the camps, like I didn't realize that was not normal until I started getting more educated about it. So I can say, yeah, it's very like, it was kind of scary, but it wasn't something that I didn't think was normal. I just assumed that that's what was supposed to happen. It
was normalized. You're so used to just seeing
it was the everyday. It was like the day-to-day life that people were living there.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's very sobering for those of us that have family that live outside the United States. I think traveling abroad, depending on where it could be, it's a very eye-opening experience leaving the States, because you see like, wow, things are like really different, here, and the injustice is such more blatant. I feel like in your face, especially when you go travel abroad. So thank you for sharing, that personal experience. So for our listeners who aren't familiar, can you tell them what exactly is the Palestinian Youth Movement? Why was it founded, and what is the mission goal of the organization?
Yeah, so the Palestinian Youth Movement is a transnational grassroots organization, and we are here in the U.S., Canada, Europe. And basically our goal is to kind of unify Palestinians in the Arab world, in the diaspora, and come together and kind of find solutions on how to combat Zionism and just try to help our people in Palestine. So I got involved with the Palestinian Youth Movement San Diego chapter, and here it's really like listening to see what the community is wanting and how to strengthen like the Palestinian and Arab community here. Our goal really is to just get people educated about Palestine and also figure out what we can do to help combat Zionism, and then how that is affecting our communities here and abroad.
We talked about this a little bit off camera earlier. What has been one of the biggest obstacles in educating the public about apartheid in Palestine and just people who are not from the diaspora and not familiar?
Yeah, I think people just don't know about Palestine or hadn't known about Palestine in the past. And there's a lot of like controversy. It's a lot of, you know, a lot of words get thrown around when you talk about Palestine. And I think people, up until last year, since the war in Gaza started, they didn't really know anything about it. And it wasn't until like people started seeing, you know, firsthand accounts on social media about what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Palestine as a whole, that they started to be like, oh, that's really weird. Like, what's going on? Why have I not heard more about this? And then people wanting to get more educated about the situation.
I see. You said that you got involved with this chapter here in San Diego through college. Was there like a specific like aha moment that like kind of drew you like, oh, I need to join this org, you know, to be part of this movement?
Yeah, it was actually one of the events that I had gone to that was thrown by the Palestinian Youth Movement. There was a delegation that had gone to a country in Latin America, and they were drawing similarities between what's going on in Palestine versus what was going on in that specific like Latin American country. And that kind of was like my aha moment, if you will, of like, oh my God, it's not just happening in Palestine, it's really happening everywhere else.
Yeah, the intersectionality.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the more that we draw those parallels, it just becomes just apparent how like this affects all of us.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely bookmark that because we're definitely going to come back to that point right here. So since October 7th, 2023, Palestinian officials have documented the killing of at least 46,416 people killed by the IOF in Gaza, according to Al Jazeera. Although several orgs claim that death toll could be, in fact, much significantly higher, violence in Gaza and the West Bank, it historically ebbs and flows and it peaks and valleys. And obviously this is a 75+ year struggle that started long before 2023. But for people who are somehow not been paying attention, what makes this moment in history different from anything else in the past?
I think, and I feel like I mentioned this earlier, is that the difference that we have today is the technology that's around us. And I think since October, like people have been able to see on the ground what's going on. It's not just, okay, this many people are dying. It's like, okay, there's this one person who's documenting very specifically what is happening to them. And we're feeling more of like an emotional connection. And there's not this like disconnect that we've seen with like mainstream media where they're only showing a specific side to the story. You know, we've been able to see people like Bisan, who's very much documenting how the war has been affecting her and the ongoing genocide is affecting the people around her, which is getting people to become more emotionally involved in what's going on. And you know, we have like platforms like TikTok and, you know, Instagram and the videos that have been coming out that people are starting to feel a connection to these folks back in Palestine. So they feel like, okay, this could be me, this could have been me, but because I live here in the States or I live in the West, I'm more protected because of the superpower that I'm living in. So people in Palestine have been able to document what's going on, and I think that's what's been able to like make this point way different than it was in the past. You know, people are able to see, again, firsthand what's going on, which they haven't been able to do in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's such a contrast. There's just much more information being shared than there was in 2014 and even in 2018 as well. Like there's just, it's night and day, just how more personal accounts people are able to share, you know, with literally like the click of a, you know, finger on a smartphone, really.
Yeah.
Back in May, the Palestinian Youth Movement chapter here in San Diego and a coalition of other organizations took part in an encampment at UCSD. And that was a week-long encampment. And I wanted to ask, that protest received a lot of attention here in San Diego. I think it's, you know, it was the longest, most prolonged one. It wasn't just a one-off march or like a rally. It got a lot of attention. The police came and broke up the encampment, and several students are actually still facing, you know, potential charges and punishment from the university. I wanted to ask if you're at liberty to discuss, you know, do you believe that the end goals of that protest were met?
I don't believe they were, honestly. Honestly, the encampment that happened last year in May, was something that the students have kind of put together in order to get their university to listen to their demands. They wanted their university to actually divest from the weaponry, the other companies that were profiting off of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but also other things that were happening in Palestine as well. And I don't think that their demands were ever met, you know, and I think this goes to show you that, like, we have the administration there who paid little to no mind to their students that were on campus, and rather they wanted to protect the profits. And we saw that because the police came in and they destroyed, you know, their encampment. They also harmed a lot of students, whether that was like pepper spraying them or gassing them. It was absolutely ridiculous how much force was used on these students. And all of this was caused by the administration, by UCSD. And instead of protecting the students and listening to their demands, they decided that violence was going to be their answer. And they did not care about their students' demands. So their demands were never met, and I don't know if there's still ongoing conversations, but I think the thing that the students came out from that was that the other student body became more involved, and they saw more of what was happening, and they saw the injustice that was going on. And I think people became more educated after that because they wanted to be more involved in Palestinian activism afterwards. They wanted to learn more about why is it that the administration wanted to silence these students and their specific, you know, form of speech. So I think despite them not achieving their intended goal, there was another goal that they did reach.
Do you think it's fair to say that the student body became even more sympathetic to the students that took part in that encampment, especially given the heavy-handed response by both the police and the administration?
Yeah, because I think the students saw that this was something that could happen to them, essentially, if they were in that same position. So I think people became more sympathetic, like you said, but people were like questioning why did the administration decide that violence was the answer to take upon the student body? So I think they definitely succeeded in getting more, you know, attention and more people talking about it. But whether the administration decided to divest, that's still up in the air.
Gotcha. Yeah, it definitely feels like, not to editorialize, but I feel like as someone that covered the encampment as well, I think it was a launching moment for a lot of people that maybe this was their first time, and I think that this was like their awakening, like, no, this is important, you know, and like this is something that like doesn't just affect one group of people, it also affects me because we see the way that state violence is utilized for any kind of dissent that challenges the status quo here in the States as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Following up on like that same question, you know, personally, you know, what, because again, this was a week-long encampment protest that went on. Personally, what was the most powerful or fondest memory that sticks out to you when you recall your experiences at the encampment?
I think something that was so interesting to see was the involvement of the community. It wasn't necessarily like the activist community or the organizer community that we're used to. Like, the broader community got involved with this encampment. People started bringing in water, people started bringing the students food and like other supplies that they needed. People were donating books. So it was just like the entire community felt a responsibility towards this, and to see that and to see like the strength really does come from all of us getting together and rallying behind a cause was one of the most important things for me, because it really proved to us that like we are not alone and that there is an entire group of people who are also supporting us. So I think, yeah, that was amazing to see.
Yeah, it was very powerful and very beautiful to see community come together, because as you were saying, there were workshops, people, you know, medic training, history, poetry, community prayer, you know, just like, you know, there's really powerful moments of, you know, intersectionality and solidarity. And it was just amazing. Something something personally even I've never seen. You know?
No,
so
same.
Just,
and I went to college here in the States, and I had never experienced anything like that until I witnessed like the encampment, and people really care about the students here, and they care about, you know, what happens to them, and just being, like you said, like there was medical training, randomly first aid trainings. There were people giving, you know, lectures, and people were donating books. They had a lot of art workshops and things like that. So it's just people really came together, and it goes to show you that like you don't have to have a specialty in politics, in, you know, education, in history, and whatever. You just have to care, and whatever it is that you do, and you can definitely give back to the movement. It's not like only I can participate because I took this political science class and I'm very educated in this. No, it's like literally anyone. All you have to do is care. That's it.
I say this all the time when I speak to people. I say that, you know, no one person can do everything, but, you know, everybody can do something. So like if you're a teacher, you teach. If you're an artist, you create art. Maybe your gift is you are good with working with children, so you watch people's children while they're off doing this work. You know, everybody has a role to play. And I felt like that was something that was exemplified there at the encampment, which was just very incredible to see.
Yeah, I agree.
But thank you so much for sharing, because that's definitely a moment from last year that I look back very fondly upon as well. So continuing on, as for anyone that's watching doesn't know, we are filming here in San Diego. We're from San Diego, and San Diego County is home to the nation's largest concentration of military personnel. Currently, or at any given time, there's 111,000 active duty service people stationed here in the city. And it is also home to a litany of manufacturers such as Northrop Grumman and Maersk, which are contracted out by the U.S. military. Needless to say, geographically, this puts the chapter in a very unique position to directly address both militarism and arms manufacturing. Has this made organizing here in San Diego more difficult, or has it put the chapter in a unique position to bring more attention to these issues than, say, other sister chapters in other regions might be able to?
I feel like both. I feel like it's kind of difficult, you know, because there is like mass like militarism here in San Diego, but it also, like you said, it's very unique that we are here in San Diego, and like you'll find people in all different types of jobs that are either contributing or participating in these, like whether it's being in the military or whether it's working at one of these like weapons manufacturers or shipping manufacturers. Like you will find people in all walks of life in these areas, which will slightly make it easier for us because we can get more connections and we can meet people, you know, on a like more human level. I think for us personally, we've been doing a Maersk campaign, and with that Maersk campaign, it's been a little bit challenging because a lot of the contracts are with the U.S. military, so it's a lot more difficult to get information when we're trying to figure out, you know, like who do we talk to about this Maersk campaign, or how do we figure out where these weapons are being produced or manufactured or shipped out from. It is difficult, but I think the thing is that there's so many other communities that are affected by the same issues here in San Diego, so being able to kind of collaborate and work together has been helpful.
For listeners out there that aren't familiar, I wanted to elaborate on that. Like, what is Maersk? And tell us a little bit about the Maersk campaign that the Palestinian Youth Movement has been, you know, working on for the past several months.
Yeah, so Maersk is a shipping company that have notoriously shipped a lot of military cargo to and from the Zionist state of Israel. And essentially, our campaign is to get them to stop shipping military cargo. And in the past couple months, there has been a lot of evidence showing that they have been shipping military cargo, despite them constantly saying that they have not and do not ship military cargo. So I think it's something that's very important. I think it's something that people need to get a little bit more educated on, and specifically here in San Diego, like I said, you know, we have all large weapons manufacturing companies here, so we are part of the problem here in San Diego. And I think it's once we start becoming more educated about it, we can come together and collaborate on ways to kind of stop that.
Because of such the high concentration of military personnel, and also these adjunct jobs, like you said, that contribute to it, because there's people that work at NASCO or the shipyards, you know, that work on this military equipment. Has that made it at all more difficult to organize here in San Diego, or has that not as much been a factor?
I think it has, but it's also like, I think bringing the issue more into like the human element and getting like people, specifically like dock workers, like I don't think they understand, I don't think they know like what they're shipping. They're kind of just like, this is my job, so I'm putting the cargo on the ships. But it's like, okay, like let me tell you more about what is being, you know, put on these ships. And I think when people start realizing, oh, like this is harming other people, they themselves are not going to want to do that. And I think like it's just the point of getting people more educated, and that's really where we are here in San Diego to kind of do.
Has that been a difficult point of contention to reach to certain people? Because that is something that I myself, I have thought how do we bridge that gap? Because there's a lot of working class people of color who are sympathetic to these causes, but like either they may not be aware of like how their job inadvertently contributes to shipping these weapons, to Gaza and other, places throughout the world. But also these are working class people. They're like, well, this is my job. If I stop working, I can't feed my family, or I can't pay my mortgage or stuff like that, as an organizer, it's like, how do you see like overcoming that?
It's hard. It's not easy at all. I think like you said, a lot of the people that are working these kinds of jobs are people of color, and a lot of people are kind of just like, okay, what does Palestine have to do with me? What does this specific cause have to do with me? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm, loading military cargo on this ship. Like, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect my family. But I think it's like reminding people that like this cause is not just about Palestine. It's about like everyone else and all the other causes. Like, we're all connected, and just trying to bring that back into how we explain like what is going on and why people putting military cargo on this ship is going to inadvertently affect you at the end. And I think once you have that conversation with people are going to be more receptive to listening. But it's just the starting of like, how am I going to open that conversation with you? It is difficult, I'm not going to lie to you, but I think it's a crucial and very important thing that we need to do. And we've been trying to do it for the past couple months, and we're getting there. I think it's working on some level, but like I said, it's still very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, very difficult, but still, nonetheless, very much needed,
yeah.
And something that you guys have been tirelessly working at as well. So kind of, this leads actually perfectly in our next question, is that like this issue is not just central to Gaza, and it doesn't just affect Palestinians or even just Arabs. I always point out to convey that in my reporting that the tactics, the weaponry, the surveillance and technology that's used overseas, whether it's by the IOF or the US military in another theater of war, will always eventually come back to US shores and into our communities here domestically. And we can see that in the way that military weaponry is practically gifted to local police, and the militarized police response that we saw at the encampments as well, and various universities like in New York and at USC. As an organizer whose main focus is addressing these issues and drawing these parallels, kind of explain, like just in the most plain terms to the average layperson, why is it that what goes on in Gaza and the West Bank and other places abroad affects the average person here in the States as well?
That's a great question. I think, something that's important and I don't think people really realize this, is that a lot of the police that are trained here also go back to Palestine to be trained. And so they go train with the IOF soldiers, they learn military tactics from them, and they come use all of those war tactics here on the civilian population. So San Diego actually used to do some exchanges with the Israeli Defense Forces over there, the occupation forces, and a lot of those tactics were used here. So if you remember, like Black Lives Matter back in 2020, they dispersed a lot of riot gear, and they used tear gas on the community. They use these tactics as scare tactics, and they know that they work because they've been tested in Palestine against the Palestinians, either Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza or inside the 48 territories. So it's not like, it doesn't affect us all, because they're all learning from Israel. They're all learning how, to kind of contain communities. They're trying to pressure communities and scare them into not, fighting back or addressing their concerns. And I think, like, if we continue to ignore, what is happening in Palestine, it's going to happen here in the US. And we've seen it in 2020 with Black Lives Matter. We've seen it recently with all of the encampments that happen specifically on college campuses. In what reality is it okay to come at students the way the police force did, and riot gear and tear gas? Like, at the end of the day, they're students, and it's the university's responsibility to keep those students safe, and they didn't do that. They said they saw a threat, so what did they do? They attacked. They used tear gas, they used riot gear. How many of those students were harmed? And we don't have any reporting about that now. So I think people need to wake up and see everything is interconnected. We are all connected. No matter how much we try to ignore it, we are all connected.
Yes, Absolutely, exactly. We are all connected, and one thing, like you said, I always like to point out to people that like the knee restraint that was used on George Floyd in 2020 was a tactic pioneered by the IOF. For people that maybe are too young to remember, you know, the Ferguson uprisings in 2014, the Ferguson PD, they traveled to train with the IOF as well, using those same repressive tactics. And one thing that always sticks out in my mind is that when the protesters in Ferguson were dealing with tear gas and other chemical weapons, it was people in Gaza giving them tips on Twitter on how to, you know, how to aid that, how to, you know.
Because it's something in Palestine that they go through on a day-to-day basis. Like, people in the camps have been, you know, they go through this, they're either attacked with, you know, the tear gas, but they're either attacked, you know, physically. And all of these trainings that they experience, they come back here in the US and then they use them during protests, they use them during any actions that are happening, you know, the student encampments. Like, those same tactics are going to be carried over time and time again in Black and brown communities. And that's why we, as Black and brown people and people of color, we need to realize that all of our struggles are interconnected. And if we don't realize this sooner, like, it's gonna be a really bad outcome here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, we know we talked earlier, but it's just insane to see how, like, not just here in the States, but other countries, we see like surveillance at the border in Mexico, and then at other nations in Central America where they either receive, whether it's training or weapons directly from Israel, you know, to use. And it's, like you said, we're all connected. And like everything is like a domino. It's going to affect you sometime down the line eventually, whether it's directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
I think that like what you guys do, that bringing that education awareness is why it's so pivotal to bring that to the forefront. Right now, we are currently seeing a rise in Islamophobia and anti-immigrant rhetoric and right-wing extremism, even more so than we have in the past, which is absolutely insane to think. But none of these things by any means are new, but we're seeing them ratcheting up under the last days of a so-called progressive Biden administration. During this past election, many people in 2024 refused to vote for what they saw as the lesser of two evils. What consequences do you believe this perceived centrism that has, you know, been a mainstay in our society will have, you know, long term, especially since, you know, this centrism, it seems to only incrementally lead to worse and worse outcomes? Yeah,
I think it's just like we're trying to remain neutral on situations where we hope that they're not going to affect us. So like with the Biden and Harris administration, her trying to get elected and constantly ignoring Palestine, you know, a lot of the community, a lot of the country, that was a really like critical thing for them. And for them to ignore that, you know, they kind of saw the backlash of that, and they saw what's going to happen if you don't start addressing the concerns of the people. So people have very specific questions. People want to know that at the end of the day, are they going to be okay? Are their needs going to be met? And I think for the past couple years and the past couple elections, we were just, let's try to maintain the status quo. Let's try to be neutral. Let's try to maintain, you know, not really big shifts, not really big changes. And we're seeing that like people aren't gonna be okay with that in the end, and people want change. People want to do things, and whether that's going to be a radical shift to the right, a radical shift to the left, people want something new, and to constantly, you know, try to remain like centrist, it put us in the situation that we're in right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Politicians lose elections for a litany of reasons, but do you think that Palestine in particular was a big sticking point to why Harris lost the election?
I mean, I don't think so, because I think a lot of it had to do with like her not really listening to the people. You know, it wasn't just Palestine that was a main concern. A lot of other issues came up, and a lot of them were not addressed. I think the main issue is like not listening to the people. And when you're not listening to the people aren't going to vote for you. Yeah, absolutely. People aren't going to, you know, keep returning if they're being ignored and their needs are being ignored. Absolutely.
We're in a moment in the United States where it's abundantly clear that this country is moving in the direction of far-right fascism. And fascism is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days. And with the re-election of Donald Trump, again in the Oval Office, it's all but guaranteed we're going to see a marked increase in Islamophobic rhetoric and actions for both Trump and his supporters. moving forward into 2025, what are the goals and objectives that the San Diego Palestinian Youth Movement has as we enter what is going to be very likely a long and very difficult next couple of years?
Yeah, I think, we've seen Trump be elected in the past, and I think the most important thing to come out of all of this is to remain strong within our community, and whether that's having coalitions, being strong with other community partners, ensuring that we are out here to protect ourselves. We're going to protect ourselves with the community that's surrounding us, and I think through coalitions we're able to do that. And as long as we remain together as a community, I feel like we're going to be okay.
You said that we've seen Trump elected again. Is there any sense that you think that this second administration, that he may be emboldened, or that maybe some of the quote-unquote safeguards that were in place the first time around won't be there this time?
It's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like anything is possible now. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like we live in the upside down where norms are out the window these days.
So I have no idea. I hope for the best for our communities, and I hope that as long as we're constantly sticking together, we're constantly watching out for one another, and we remain in unity as coalition and togetherness of the community, I really feel like we'll be fine. It's just reminding ourselves not to other our communities. We are one, and united as one, we're going to be able to move forward, and the interconnectedness of all of our struggles. So.
Solidarity is key, and we're all connected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Over the past 14 months, we've seen some of the most horrific images shared in Gaza, and it is perhaps the first genocide to be broadcast live across social media. Although we have seen awful, vile videos and imagery, we've also seen a cascade of solidarity with the Palestinian people from across the globe on a level never seen before. And although we face what will undoubtedly be a very long and difficult fight ahead, what has been the most encouraging thing you've seen over the past year that inspires you to keep fighting and gives you hope for the future?
So one of the most important things, I think, has been seeing all the new people being introduced to the movement and being introduced to Palestine as a whole. The past year we've seen a lot of our community, our regular community that comes in, but also we've seen a lot of new community that we had not seen before, new people who have been wanting to get involved or who haven't known about Palestine. They found out about what was happening through social media, and then suddenly they saw, let me get involved, let me ask more questions. So there has been a lot more people who are coming into the movement and asking more questions and wanting to learn, and I think that has really pushed us to keep going. There's a lot of burnout, especially if you feel like there's no active solution, but I think being able to see more people wanting to get involved, and we haven't seen that in the past at all. In the past couple of years, we've done a lot of Palestine activism, a lot of Palestine 101, get to know really what's going on in Palestine. And it only has been this past year with the genocide going on that we've seen such an increase in people wanting to become more educated. So I think seeing those people who we normally don't see or ever see wanting to get involved has really pushed us into seeing okay, our efforts are going noticed. People are seeing what's going on, and people want to learn, and people want to get involved. So I think that's really just what's been pushing us.
Absolutely. For the person, like you said, there's been a lot of burnout, people that don't see a direct path to making change. Like you said, it's left a lot of people feeling hopeless. It's a conflict that is 8,000 miles away on the other side of the globe, and many people feel removed from or powerless to address. Short of engaging in protest and discontinuing the voice or solidarity, what realistic actions can the average layperson here in the States take to support Gaza and the people in Palestine who are affected by genocide?
Yeah, so the Palestinian Youth Movement has a fundraiser that we've been hosting the past, I think, 4 or 5 months called Ta'ziz al-Samud, which is the People Stand with Gaza. And we have been doing this fundraiser in collaboration with the Middle Eastern Children's Alliance. And basically we've been raising funds to help kind of rebuild the infrastructure in Gaza post, the war. And we've reached our $1 million goal. And so now we're, pushing for 2 million, and it's going to help with medical supplies, bringing in food, but also helping to rebuild infrastructure, whether that's schools and hospitals that were bombed. I think that's really the one way we've been able to continue going and continue with our movement with this. I would say donating to the fundraiser, definitely, but also, you know, getting more involved like locally with organizations that are doing like political work here, and whether that's calling your representatives, letting them know like what your stance is on Palestine and what you as like the people are advocating for. I think that's going to be very important moving forward.
Absolutely. And for the people listening, where can they find and follow the San Diego PYM chapter online for updates, upcoming actions, events, and any future fundraisers?
Yeah, so they can follow us on social media, pym.sandiego at Instagram. That's really where we post all of our information and any updates that we have about events that we have posting.
Perfect. Do you have any closing comments or anything else you'd like to let our listeners know about yourself, your work, or just some closing words of wisdom?
Just get involved with any, you know, Palestine-related work that's going on. Follow the Palestinian Youth Movement. If you're in San Diego, follow us. We're always hosting events. We're doing workshops. And free Palestine.
Absolutely. Always free Palestine. Internets, you heard it right here. Subrein from the San Diego Palestinian Youth Movement. Thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we out, internets. Peace.